Recording in progress.
Right, welcome everybody to this afternoon's webinar, Blooming and Beautiful Flower-Rich Grasslands. You're going to learn really practical information about how to manage the grass around your churchyard or in your burial ground, how to actively manage it for people and for nature. You might well know, so today is one of a whole series of 12 webinars we've got going on this week, all themed around different aspects of land and nature, timed to coincide with Churches Count on Nature, our pilot project, where all around the country, about over 300 churches are taking part in Churches Count on Nature, going out into their churchyards and green spaces and finding the wonderful plants and insects and birds that live there and recording them. And in parallel with that project, nationally, we're running our series of land and nature webinars, and you are very welcome to this afternoon's topic. The brief housekeeping, we'll be using the Q&A for your questions rather than the chat. Andrea's presentation is about 15 minutes long, so we'll have plenty of time for questions. So please do think what you'd like to ask her and pop it in the Q&A, and you can see other people's questions there and you can click your thumbs up next to them. And the ones with the most thumbs up go to the top. After today, I'll send you an email that will have the slides. It'll have any links that are shared in the chat, and it'll have a link through to our feedback form. So please do feel free to take notes, but don't feel you have to write down everything, because you will get the slides afterwards. And I'm recording each of these webinars, and then in a few days' time, when I've got them all processed and up on the web, then they'll be shared through our website. We're doing Andrea's webinars a slightly different way in that she's pre-recorded the PowerPoint with the voiceover to be safe against bad internet connections from the very rural area where she lives. Yesterday it took us a couple of goes to get that working properly, but it did work second time. So I'm hoping for first time lucky this time, but if it takes us a few seconds, just bear with us. Always begin with the trailers of future attractions. These are the other webinars we've got coming up this week. If you spot something there that interests you, please do book on. We'd love to see you at as many of our webinars as you can make it along to. They're all fascinating topics. And then, oh, I've skipped forward 2 slides rather than 1. Let's go back one. And then on Saturday, we've got coming up, hosted by Sheffield Diocese, their Eco Church Festival online, which is tying in with Churches Count on Nature. When Andrea's finished speaking, I'll put in the chat the links through to the webinar program and the links through to the Sheffield event. And then other topics further ahead are our session on heat pumps, our 3 different sessions on different aspects of eco-church, and then our fundraising webinars. So again, once Andrea's finished, I'll put those in the chat and hopefully you can book on. Now, the main event. You might have come and heard Andrea speak yesterday. She is so knowledgeable and so practical with her advice about how to manage your churchyards and green spaces. She's from Caring for God's Acre, where she leads their projects about managing burial grounds. And she's an ecologist by background. You're in very safe hands today to get the practical information that you need. And I'm Catherine Ross, and I'm one of the staff who work on the environment programme for the Church of England nationally. I'm in the Cathedral and Church Buildings division, so all to do with bricks and mortars of our churches and then the biodiversity of church grounds. Right, I'll stop sharing those slides and close that down. Then I'll get Andrea's presentation up and running, and we will be away. Just take me a few seconds to change over from one to the other, so bear with me.
Welcome to this blooming and beautiful webinar, which will focus on how to increase the diversity and abundance of wildflowers in your churchyard. I'm Andrea and I work for Care of God's Acre, the charity dedicated to the conservation of all burial grounds. We work towards these places being beautiful, welcoming and connected to their communities. We're a national charity covering England and Wales, and 2020 was our 20th anniversary. We focus on the conservation of the natural, built and social heritage and support burial grounds of all types and sizes, ranging from small church or chapel yards to green burial sites and urban cemeteries. Just to set the scene, a churchyard or burial ground may be the most ancient enclosed piece of land in a parish, town or city. The grassland will have been relatively undisturbed, reseeding naturally for hundreds if not thousands of years. It will also have been both scythed for hay and grazed by animals during its time as a burial ground. A benefit of this management over a very long time is a rich diversity of grasses, flowers and animals. This old grassland, often referred to as unimproved, was once widespread in the UK but is now rare. Since the 1940s, over 97% of it has vanished. Most burial grounds predate the 1940s and have acted as sanctuaries for this declining habitat. In some areas, burial grounds are some of the few places it remains. They have not been artificially fertilised, treated with herbicides or ploughed. So broadly speaking, burial sites dating pre-1945 are likely to have a rich variety of plants and just need the right management to help it to flower in all its glory. No reseeding is usually necessary. During this talk, we'll be exploring how to manage the grass in a way that encourages wildflowers whilst being sensitive to visitors' needs. A mixture of grass heights is best for wildlife, as each type benefits different plants and animals. These heights also suit the various usages of the site. The variety of heights to consider are short, medium and long. Here we have short grass. It looks neat and cared for and allows people to visit graves easily. Ground-feeding birds such as thrushes and wagtails enjoy this height. It may contain flowers close to the ground, such as wild thyme or black medic, and is suitable for rare grassland fungi which are able to push through the short grass. Medium-length grass is grass that's cut to a height of 10 centimetres or 4 inches. It can be cut with an ordinary mower, just set the cutting bar higher than normal. It can be cut less often than short grass, so fewer resources are needed. It will contain more flowers than if it's cut short, such as bird's foot trefoil, clover and southhill, which are important sources of food for insects. The height makes it beneficial for other invertebrates, small mammals and reptiles such as slowworms. We would always recommend keeping grass short or medium length where you have areas containing memorials that are still being visited, or areas where you have summer fetes or gatherings. Keeping a strip of short or medium height along the edges of paths can help keep your management looking intentional and really sets off the beauty of the flowery areas. Having paths cut through any areas of long grass is always welcome by visitors. Long flower-rich grassland benefits more plants and animal species than either short or medium. If the site is old and unimproved, then the range of flowers may be spectacular. The key to encouraging wildflowers to grow is keeping the nutrient level of the soil low. If the soil nutrients are too high, then coarse grasses such as Yorkshire fog, false oak grass and cocksfoot will use these nutrients, grow tall and outcompete the finer grasses and wildflowers. So how do we keep the soil nutrients low? The main way is to pick up grass clippings after every cut, whether that be cutting a few centimetres off or a few feet. You need to keep wildflower areas away from your compost areas, as compost will leach nutrients into the soil. If you have areas of long grass in the summer, cut and remove the grass before it turns yellow or brown, otherwise the nutrients will go back into the soil. Also, you can introduce yellow rattle. The flowers found here are perennials, not annuals, so you won't find poppies and cornflowers, etc., because annuals such as these grow where the ground is disturbed, such as by ploughing or digging. Managing long grass obviously requires less mowing in the growing season than short or medium does, saving time and money. However, when it is time to cut, there is a lot of work to do in a small amount of time. There's lots of grass to deal with, so good planning and organisation is vital. It is always good to start with just small areas of long grass until you are confident in managing it. So let's concentrate on managing long grass. Firstly, leave it to grow and flower for around 12 weeks without cutting it. You can choose this 12-week window. So if you stop cutting around mid-March, 12 weeks later, it's mid-June and due a cut. If you stop cutting around mid-April, then 12 weeks later is mid-July and it's due a cut around then. The reason why it's best not to leave it for much more than around, say, 12-14 weeks is to do with fertility. Remember that the key to wildflowers is low fertility soil. As mentioned, the idea is to cut the grass and remove it before the nutrients goes from it back into the soil. So you need to cut it when it's still green. If it looks like the photo here, then instead of removing the nutrients when you've cut the grass, the nutrients will have already gone back into the soil. The other disadvantage to leaving it until it's well over is that it's harder to cut and it looks quite scraggy, so you're far more likely to get complaints. If you have an area of spring flowers, such as daffodils, primroses and violets, that you want to also dedicate to having long grass full of summer flowers, then simply let it carry on growing after the spring flowers and cut it around June. When you are deciding where to leave grass to grow long, there are a few things to consider. Firstly, meadow flowers won't thrive in shady areas, they need light. So choose your meadowy areas in places away from trees or places shaded by buildings. Next, as we've heard, low nutrients is key for wildflowers. So keep your wildflower area away from spoil heaps and away from the compost heap. Next, choose areas that you already know are quite species diverse. Do you know if anyone has already completed a survey of your site? Maybe contact the local wildlife trust, your local record centre, and also have a look at the National Biodiversity Atlas webpage, which I'll pop a screenshot of at the end. If you haven't left it to grow long before and feel unsure of what areas are diverse, then head out at any time of year and look at the ground. If you can see lots of different leaf shapes, then that area has a wide variety of perennial meadow species. So these are the areas to choose. So we've gone through some of the basics. Let's see what this looks like in practice. We'll consider 3 types of scenario for what you may find when you leave an area of your site to grow long. So first scenario is that you leave an area to grow long and it's full of flowers and looks beautiful. Next, you may leave an area to grow long and it looks okay, but there are not many flowers and it starts to look messy halfway through the season. Finally, you may have a neglected area that has been left long for more than a year or so, and you realise that you've got some work to do to restore the species richness of the area. So, on to the first scenario. You leave it to grow long and in the first year it looks blooming and beautiful. If over the years you've been moderately mowing your site and regularly picking up the grass clippings, chances are, if you leave an area to grow long, from March to April for around 12 weeks, you will see something similar to this in the first year. Remember, these are areas with perennial flowers and, as long as mowing hasn't been so low that it's scalped the soil, and there hasn't been an influx of nutrients, then our diversity of flowers and fine grasses will be there just waiting to bloom. The types of wildflowers that you will see will depend on what area of the country you're in and the soil type. Now on to scenario 2. This is probably the most common scenario. Here, if you leave an area to grow long, it looks okay, but there are not many flowers and it starts to look a bit messy halfway through the season. This is usually because the soil is quite nutrient rich and the coarse grasses such as Yorkshire fog, false oak grass and cocksfoot are enjoying taking up this nutrients and growing tall, but this leads them to outcompete the wildflowers, which start declining. This is often due to years of grass clippings being left on or mulched in, and also the long grass being left too long before it's cut. Therefore, the nutrients are going back into the soil rather than being removed. The solution to this is to ensure the grass is cut early enough and the grass clippings are removed after every cut. Even after just 2 years of doing this, you will notice an improvement in the number of wildflowers. These areas may also benefit from the introduction of yellow rattle, which I'll cover a bit later in this talk. So on to scenario 3. You have a neglected area and you want to restore the wildflowers. Some areas may not have been cut at all for years. This can sometimes be due to a lack of resources, or sometimes it's due to people misunderstanding how to manage for wildflowers and thinking that letting it grow long all year round is what's needed. If you have a large burial ground, then these neglected areas have their place. They benefit wildlife such as small mammals, reptiles, hedgehogs and birds. However, the variety of wildflowers will have severely decreased, and given that these sites contain some of the remaining 3% of flower-rich grassland left in the UK, we really need to prioritise getting these areas back into active management if they're taking over your site. So let's consider how to restore them back as wildflower areas. These areas tend to be dominated by coarse grasses and scrub. Restoring them is all about frequently cutting and removing clippings for a few years. We often advise cutting on a monthly or 6-weekly cycle throughout the spring and summer. This will reduce the strength of the coarse, tusky grass and start to create the right conditions for finer grasses and flowers. If you do not have the resources for cutting every 6 weeks, then try at least to cut 3 times a year. The best times for this would be early June, early July, and then early September. You may need to do this for a few years and then follow on with the cutting regimes for long, medium or short grass, depending on your plans. Once it's starting to be under better management, you may also want to collect seeds from other areas of your site and sow them here. Also, you could carry out a few turf transplants between this area and a more diverse area of your site. Always make sure you're not spreading around any unwanted species if you do this. Some sites have Japanese knotweed, for example, which you wouldn't want to spread to a different area. So in all these scenarios, a common theme is always to rake up the clippings, but where do we put them all? One way is to have a dedicated compost area with different bays so that the clippings can be turned to encourage quicker decomposition. Some sites have a friendly farmer who is happy to take the clippings away and compost them as a favour. Some rural sites have their clippings taken to a biodigester to make energy. Others are so full of wildflower seeds that their clippings are wanted by other community initiatives to help reseed other grassy areas such as verges. Some sites even make hay out of it. They bale it up using our hand hay baler and sell it to the local community. So, I mentioned yellow rattle, which can be a bit of a magic bullet when it comes to managing for wildflowers. This is because it has an interesting feature of being hemiparasitic. That is to say, it photosynthesizes, but is also partly parasitic on the roots of a host, and that host can be grass. So basically, where yellow rattle grows, the vigour of the surrounding grass is dramatically reduced, sometimes by 50%. As well as this, yellow rattle helps create gaps for wildflowers to fill. It's an annual and needs to be used the same time as it's harvested, and needs to be sown on a bit of bare soil before the winter because it requires a prolonged period of cold before it germinates. We always find scarifying the soil with a rake and spreading some molehills to sow the seeds on really helps with the germination rate. So now it's time to think about your site and work out what areas are best for your wildflower area. What areas need to be kept short? Are there any neglected patches that you want to restore? Here's an example of a beautiful churchyard, St Andrew's at Norton in Paris. So here on the map you can see that they've identified where they want short grass, medium grass and long grass. So for example, area E they want to keep short. Area C is a spring meadow and they're going to keep that of a medium length. And area A is going to have long grass. They've decided to bring a neglected bramble corner that was getting bigger each year back into management and keep tusky areas just to the edges of the churchyard. It's a very small churchyard in a rural location with many hedges and scrubby areas in the near vicinity. So there are plenty of alternative areas for the wildlife that enjoys scrub and brambles. This corner is now being cut as frequently as possible, and in a year or two the plan is to establish yellow rattle and undertake turf transplants to restore its diversity and reclaim it back as an area rich in wildflowers. Area A, that has been managed as a wildflower area for a few years, is really coming on. Yellow rattle has established well, and the flowers such as these harebells are becoming way more abundant. Once you have your plan, remember to let the wider community know what you're doing and why. In our experience, when groups let the wider community know that they're managing their site for wildlife as well as for people, they often find it's much easier to engage more of the community to help out. With a written plan and map, it's easier to organise work parties and to delegate tasks. For example, pop up a poster in the porch, put an article in the parish magazine, put a laminated sign up, and mention changes on social media and chat to visitors. This is a great time to invite local people to tell you what they've seen in the burial ground. Have you got a botanist who can do a plant survey? Is there a bird enthusiast who can let you know what birds visit your site? We have a starter guide and a botanical companion that are really useful publications to help identify wildlife and to encourage others to record what they see. We can post you a starter guide for free, and the botanical companion is free to download from our website. To find out what others have seen in your site over the years, then ask around. Also, you can pop to the National Biodiversity Atlas webpage. This is where many of the wildlife records that people have submitted over the years to a database called iRecord are made publicly accessible. So you can see what has been spotted in your churchyard, and you can submit your own records here directly, or you can email us at wildlife@cfga.org.uk. I hope this introduction to managing in a way that helps restore the wildflowers in your churchyard has given you ideas that you can put in place. By restoring the diversity of the plants, you'll be supporting all the other animals that rely on them, from the birds and bees to the amphibians and the mammals. If you'd like to find out how we can support you in managing your site, or if you're just generally interested in the fascinating heritage of churchyards and burial grounds, then pop to our website for free resources and mini-films. Join our webinar series, which will start running again in the autumn. Tune in to our podcast, where we'll be visiting a wide variety of sites ranging from small rural churchyards to large city cemeteries, spanning different cultures, religions and centuries. We'll be hearing from those who care for them, enjoy them and study them. Discover flower-rich sites near you by visiting our Burial Grounds to Inspire webpage, where we're mapping sites that we'd recommend visiting in the summer months. Also, if you have a well-managed place that you feel could be on this map, then do let us know. Sign up to our e-newsletter and do consider becoming a member. Like many charities, we're a membership organisation, so from as little as £2.50 a month, you can join us and receive a welcome pack, a biannual newsletter, early invitations to events, discounts on our materials, and of course that feel-good feeling that you're helping in the quest to ensure churchyards and burial grounds are kept beautiful and connected to their communities. Thank you for listening.
A lovely introduction to the subject that was, just like yesterday. So practical. Makes it really clear where to begin and how to make a start, isn't it? So for everyone listening in, if you've got questions, and I'm sure you do, if you find the Q&A and pop your questions in there, you can also do thumbs up next to other people's questions if you spot one that you think you are interested in hearing the answer to. Right, let's begin at the top. Oh, it's a very practical question about biological recording, someone who can't make it along on Friday. In terms of the specific that you've asked there about getting the slides and links, if you have registered for the webinar, I send the slides and the links out to everyone who's registered, because I'm aware some people are interested, but they can't then make it on the day because life gets in the way. So if you register for that webinar, then I'll send you the slides and the links. Andrew, is there anything you want to say quickly about biological recording for those who are here today but can't make it on Friday?
That's Harriet's topic really, but yeah, basically with biological recording, there's 4 things that you need to record. It's your name, the date you saw something, what you saw, and when you saw it. So all you need to make a really important biological record is those 4 things: who, what, when, where. And it's just as important to record the common species as the uncommon, because, for example, if we hadn't recorded swifts 20 years ago, we wouldn't, when they were very common, we wouldn't now know that they've declined by 40%. So sending in records about everything you see is really, really important. So, yeah.
And the system, I'm trying to remember the name, but it's called iPortal, isn't it? That people can put their records up into. And maybe I'll find a link to it whilst you're answering the next question. And
yes, if people go to the link that I've put in, which is NBM Atlas, then that will take you to iRecord and you can upload your own records. There is a delay because what happens is, say if I put there's a peregrine falcon on the top of a church, or anything I put gets filtered by experts in that area. So if I went on holiday to Norwich and said there was a lesser spotted something there and it was a bit unusual, a verifier, an expert in that area would go, we're not going to let that through, we're going to ask that person a few more questions. But if they're just quite normal species for that area, they let them through. But it does mean that there might be a 6-month delay between you submitting them and then going on the map. So just to say that, but that's why, because every single biological record goes through that verification.
Yeah, and what you'll hear about, those of you who can make it on Friday, is that we've now got the systems joined up behind the scenes so that the recording that you do locally, that you enter, goes into the NBN Atlas, and then once it's been verified, it then flows through into the church heritage record. So we'll then know about the ecology of our churches all around the country by the records that you make locally. Right, the next question says, technically, what is the best way to cut long grass? Our workers trimmed it last year, but found it very difficult.
Yes, okay, and Sarah, you've asked 2 questions, thank you, and I accidentally replied to one, which meant it went into done, which obviously it isn't. So can I just address Sarah's first question, which looks like it's in answered, Catherine, but it wasn't. I just asked a question, so sorry about that. So Sarah asked, how can I persuade the churchyard maintenance team to leave an area uncut? They mow and trim very conscientiously. So I was just wondering, first of all, are your team volunteers or contractors? If they're contractors, it's a bit easier, isn't it? Because you basically need to just change the contract you've got with them as quickly as possible. If they're volunteers, the tricky thing is that they have probably for many years been congratulated on keeping it very manicured. And the way they've done it has probably been very appreciated, which is great. So it's quite hard to change that because the volunteers will then think that they're going to be judged harshly for not cutting it every week. So it's all about communication. So the webinar yesterday, we did about the 5 steps, which is clarifying with your group what direction you want to go with your churchyard in terms of all sorts of things. But for now, we're talking about grassland management and then the steps taken to get there. So I think if we roll back a bit, first of all, be really clear about where you want to get to and how you get there. And then it's bringing those volunteers that regularly do the mowing in on that and say, this is our vision now. We have a commitment to biodiversity. We have a commitment to encouraging wildlife and as well as people in our space. And we're joining in with a national initiative to make them feel that it's not just sort of something random that you're doing. So it's kind of selling it to them. If they're still really eager to trim where maybe you don't want them to, and that we do, in some of our sites we work in, we do corner off with some very small little posts. You don't need a faculty, I mean literally kind of hazel poles or bamboo sticks and a piece of sort of very light rope with a sign saying we are not cutting this until July because of this, this and this. So that's nice for the wider public to see why you're not cutting it, so you're less likely to get complaints. But then it does give those volunteers real, very clear permission that they're not going to be judged if they don't cut that bit, because it's really clear to everybody. So I think it's all about communication, and then also asking people if they like it, so that you can feed that back to the volunteers. And also start small. I think it's always really good with grassland management changes to start with a small area and get bigger, rather than start with a really big area, find it overwhelming, and then have to kind of go back that way. Okay, so Sarah, technically, what is the best way to cut long grass? Our worker trimmed it last year, found it very difficult. Okay, so I haven't ever used a strimmer. I scythe, all our volunteers scythe, but that's a really hard sell for some people because they do need to go on a course. I'm a scythe trainer, so people come to us and learn how to scythe. We use the Austrian scythe, which is lightweight. It can be adapted to different heights, which you need to do. Somebody 6'4" needs to have a different setup to somebody my height, 5 foot. And we find, and the volunteers find, that is the best tool for the job. So we scythe. In between small graves, sort of little areas, we use this. We use the shears. Actually, I know it's backbreaking, but when you've got a lot of volunteers, a lot of tea, and a lot of cake, it's fine. And also strimming, it's probably better to do it before it gets too rank. So, for example, strimming fresh grass is kind of a lot easier than strimming the kind of when it's gone a bit over and brown. So maybe cut a bit earlier if you want to stick to your strimmers. Then cut a bit earlier. You might find that easier on the strimmer, less likely to get all tangled up. But I must admit, our volunteers, and we've got lots of them that scythe, 20, 30, and we've trained maybe 200 over the years. Once they've scythed, they find it so much easier and nicer than the strimmer. No noise, no pollution, just as quick. In fact, most people can do it quicker. And also, when you cut, it doesn't mush it up, so it's really easy to rake up, because you just get nice long lengths of grass in a windrow, and then you just rake it up, compost it, or make hay. So yeah.
So forgive me, my probably not helped by pole dock. My picture of the fact is that it's a very physical job where you have to be very big and very strong. What you're saying to me is that you're 5 foot tall, you're my height, and that you can scythe. Is that right? Like, is it something that
anyone can? Yeah, the person that taught me was 87 when he taught me. He's now in his late 90s and he still scythes. Basically, the Old English scythe are very heavy, and yes, it's really hard, and they usually were made for quite a butch active man. The Austrian scythes, if you Google the Scythe Association, you'll see the ones I'm on about. Also, we've got a YouTube video that might feature them, but the Austrian scythes are lightweight, really nimble, and like I say, most people of all ages. And also, if you're a bit stiff, it's quite good because it limbers you up. So we have a lot of physios that like doing it. They're really, and people with slight back problems, because it's a very flowy movement. But you do need to go on a training course to do it properly.
It's the kind of thing where I wonder whether maybe a group of churches could find somebody in the area who liked doing it and had the equipment, because you don't need it every day, do you? Whether it could be shared between churches. But anyway.
Oh yeah. So, and if you go to the Scythe Association website, you will find a trainer near you, because there's one in nearly every area, who could come to you. If you pitch together, you'll need to maybe get a grant for it, or if everybody pays maybe £50, they can be trained for the day, and they'll come to you and teach you how to do it and stuff. Yeah, so
there we go.
It's worth doing if you've got willing people.
More than I ever knew about scything. Very similar. The next question says, what is the best way to cut the long grass? So I think we've answered that one.
It's a strimmer or a scythe, basically. Yeah.
The next says, how do you get rid of unwanted plants such as Japanese knotweed in an environmental way?
No, you don't really. You do get rid of it, but there isn't really an environmentally friendly way. It's basically going to the council. There's some good advice. Natural England, if you Google Japanese knotweed Natural England, they've got some really good advice on it. So yeah, don't mess around with Japanese knotweed, basically, because if you try and do it in an environmentally friendly way, you'll probably just spread it around. So you can't really dig it up and burn it or anything like that, because you then might spread it around. So sorry about that. Not much good news to say about Japanese knotweed.
How does, sorry, you can see some of my questions are from a place of ignorance. How do I know if I've got Japanese knotweed? Is it very obvious?
Yeah, it's really obvious. It's kind of like a plant that just looks like that, and it looks like an ornamental plant. But it would be good if everybody gets to know that. So if you just Google Japanese knotweed, it's quite distinctive. It's very big and quite distinctive. It will, in Wales, it has really taken over some sites. I can literally walk into a 4-acre churchyard that is full of Japanese knotweed and bramble. It will go rampant. And as a landowner or a land manager, it is your responsibility to keep on top of it, but the council should help.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is from Philip. It says, why is it that some people say we should not cut until August? Is the end of June or early July late enough for the flowers to survive for next year?
Yeah, Philip, this is a really good one, this one. Good question. What happens often is when people talk about wildflower meadows, they're mainly talking about annual meadows. So, you know, when like maybe Monty Don or the Olympic Stadium or, you know, a gardening program talks about creating a wildflower meadow, what they're doing is they're doing cornflowers and poppies, and they're annuals. So those annuals, if you cut them too early, they're not going to come back another year. So you do have to really wait until they set seed. But churchyards, burial grounds, it's nothing to do with annuals. That's more sort of agricultural land and stuff. But churchyard and burials, it's all perennials. So you don't need to let them set seed unless you're wanting to spread that seed to another site, which is another question that Dave has asked, which we'll come to. But so it doesn't matter if you cut too early because they're going to be there, they're perennials. So I think what happens is some people give advice based on they think you're talking about a wildflower annual meadow. So they say, oh, leave it, it needs to seed, but you're not. And the problem is with a perennial meadow, like we're trying to preserve here, what we've already got, if you do leave it till August, you will, again, like I've said in the webinar, you're going to start getting the nutrients coming back in. It's going to get rank, it's going to look not very nice, and you're going to get more complaints, and it's not good for the wildflowers anyway. So early is good.
And I'm assuming from that as well that the last thing you would advise people to do is go out to the garden centre and buy wildflower meadow seed. What you're saying is no, don't introduce annual wildflowers. Manage the existing grass in the right way so that the existing flowers are able to come up.
Yeah, so yeah, definitely that. The only reason why it's okay to bring a few annuals in is if you've got a flower bed. So treat them like you would if you've got a flower bed. They're not going to survive in your grassland because it's not being toiled, because these annuals, like poppies, like disturbed soil. And sometimes they come up the first year and everybody goes, "Woo, poppies," and then they don't come back and everybody's a bit disappointed. And you're messing with a very, very special rare habitat. So it's better just not even to get into that. It raises expectations, it's expensive, it won't work anyway. So embrace what you've got, which is really rare and really special. And if you manage that properly, you will get the flowers coming back.
The next question said, sorry, they're just moving around there. Where we've reintroduced appropriate species like yellow rattle or betony, is it then appropriate to record it on the biological records? Oh, what a good question. So if something's been introduced but belongs in that area naturally, should they record it?
Yeah, definitely, Dave. That's absolutely fine. And also, even, you know, you can with I think the biological records, it doesn't have to just be a sort of it can be, you can put a rose bush on there that's by the side of your church. That's absolutely fine. It doesn't have to be, you know, wild things. It could be anything that's there. Just pop it in. Anything you see, pop it in is absolutely fine.
So the next question says, please can you provide a link to information about scything the long grass? I think that's probably on one of the links you've put in the chat, isn't it? I can see one there that says cutting long grass and dealing with grass cutting. So would it be under
there? It will be in that, Charles. Yeah. Oh, but I will, shall I just put the Scythe Association link in? I'll just put that in, because if I wait, the Scythe Association. Okay, and this is where you'll get lots of information and you'll get a trainer in your area.
So it
might do festivals.
if you contacted them, they might know about people who are already trained in your local area.
Yeah, there's trainers, and yeah, they will. Yeah, definitely. I'm just wondering how. Oh, I do it in the chat, don't I? Here you go. The chat. Oh, this is the chat. No. I can't see how to get the chat back up. I'm stuck on question.
Don't worry, I'll find the South Association whilst you answer the next question. Because
okay, thank you.
So the next question is from John. Oh, we've kind of just covered this, haven't we? It says, would you recommend sowing mixed wildflower seeds?
So basically, John, no, I wouldn't, in general, unless you just want to put it in your flower beds, which is fine.
Well, let me ask then the follow-up question. It's not possible to, if you're in an area that isn't a flower-rich grassland, is there a way appropriately to turn an area into a flower-rich grassland? Because presumably where the 97% used to be, we'd want some new areas introduced.
Yes, so that would be collecting seeds or from. So how I'd recommend that is, there's various ways, isn't there? You can actually reseed with seeds, but then where do you get those seeds from? We need to be really careful because there's some really dodgy seed companies out there. So there's 2 seed companies in the UK I'd recommend if you did have a site that hasn't really got anything that you want to buy seeds to put in it. One is Emorsgate, EMMORGATE. So that's a good seed company. And the other is called Habitat Aid. So if you've got a site that isn't an ancient grassland already, then those 2 I would recommend, plus your local wildlife trust might have some seeds. But even more exciting, I would try and approach a local churchyard nearby so that you're keeping the seeds very similar in that area, because seeds that thrive in Sussex will be very different to ones that thrive up in Yorkshire. So actually getting seeds from your local area, from your local wildlife trust or another local churchyard would be really handy and a nice thing to do. So it's seeding. You could put plug plants in, but again, you need to get them from the right place. So go to those 2. They both do plug plants, which is where you buy a tiny little plant rather than seeds. And the other thing is, Dave mentioned this. I think Dave had a question about optimum time for cutting green hay. So the other thing is that you don't buy seeds, and you don't collect seeds, but when somebody has cut an area, maybe a national trust or a nature reserve near you or another churchyard, you collect that hay and you put it on your churchyard and let the seeds drop in. So you can actually do that from one area of your church. So say you buy a new area for burials and you've got an old area that's really flower rich, you could at the right time cut the long grass and carry it over and pop it on the area that's not diverse, and then you're kind of using your own site as a seed donor site. So the best time to do that, in that case, you do actually need to leave it until the plants have set seed, because you're trying to transfer the seed. So it might start looking a bit scraggy, but you're purposely leaving it till maybe end of July or the beginning of August because you want those seeds.
Okay.
So Dave, the optimum time for cutting green hay for you is whenever your plants have gone to seed, but before they've dropped the seed, because you're trying to hoof it over to another area.
And if you do that, so you're trying to introduce those seeds over here, so you take the cuttings from there and you put them down over there. In that case, it doesn't matter that the nutrients will go into the grass. You
just leave it there for a few days and then you get it off. So it does matter, yeah. So you would basically pop it over there for about 3 or 4 days and then get it off. And also you've got to do it really fresh because green hay heats up. So if you popped it in a dumpy bag and then it took 2 days to actually finally spread it, some of those seeds would have heated up so much they would have become defunct. So you really do have to do it in a few hours, pop it in, move it, spread it, leave it for a few days, rake it up, get it off.
I'm learning so much today, and I bet everyone else is as well. Right, next question says, we had a lovely lot of cowslips and primroses which were cut in May. Should they have been left to seed or will they come back? Hopefully it won't happen next year.
Yeah, Chris, they'll come back. It's absolutely fine. They're perennials. They don't need to be gone to seed. That's fine. The only thing, if you do cut them a bit early, is that it stops the nutrients going back into the plant. So it can make them a bit weedy the next year because the nutrients hasn't got back. But if it was late May, it should be absolutely fine. But they'll definitely come back. Yeah.
Then, Deborah, have you any ideas for getting rid of ground elder? Nothing else seems to grow around it.
So, Deborah, the only way we found is digging it up, and it always comes back, really. So it's probably a shady area that you've got, because ground alder won't really thrive in a mown sunny area. So the only thing you can do mainly is to keep cutting it so that it doesn't. So while it's growing and photosynthesizing, it's getting stronger. So if you don't want ground alder, then the good thing to do is just to keep cutting it so that it's not getting stronger. And then if it's in a little patch, you can actually dig it out. But it's probably under a tree where it'd be really tricky to dig the roots out. So I would just keep cutting it and making sure that it doesn't, creep into the grass area too much, which it will a bit, but it shouldn't. If it's regularly mown, it won't spread too much.
Basically, just don't let it get worse.
Yeah, is that really? Yeah, because I don't think the kind of herbicides that you are able to get hold of these days won't touch it.
Okay. Now, David has a question about a snowberry hedge. We had a snowberry hedge on the border of our churchyard, put in some 40 years ago. We grouted it out in the winter 2019. Rightly or wrongly, we seeded it with grass and wildflower seeds, so it is now a strong grass band with established old grass and flowers beside it. Is yellow rattle or a mowing regime the best for bringing the established churchyard into the new seeded area?
Okay, so, well, it sounds like, in the winter. Okay, so quite recently. So I presume you'll say, well, you only really need yellow rattle if that grass is growing very vigorously. I mean, is the problem that the grass is very vigorous that you've put in there, in which case yellow rattle would help? Or is the problem just that the grass that's put in there hasn't got any wildflowers because it's there just to replace the snowberry hedge? So I think there's probably two things. If it's very vigorous grass, which it might have been, then you can put yellow rattle in it, but you would also want to be putting your seeds from your established old grass area into it. So do it at the same time. So pop the wild yellow rattle in and also put some of your seed from the other areas in your churchyard in it as well. And if it is very vigorous, then yes, you do need to cut it regularly. So when people think about long grass, they sometimes think that they've got to have long grass all year round, but really what we're talking about here is you only have the long grass for 10 or 12 weeks and then keep cutting it and then keep taking the nutrients off while you're even cutting it short. So don't use a mulching mower or anything like that.
Yeah, that came out really strongly in the one you did yesterday, that it's not just about letting things go, it's about actively managing them, but actively managing them in a different way. So you're letting it grow long and then mowing it, and that's an active process, not just a benign neglect.
Yes, yeah.
Tim Hewitt asks, if yellow rattle is working well, would you delay cutting till August or September until it has set seed? So do you want the yellow rattle to be?
Yeah, so the yellow rattle can sometimes, the yellow rattle is the annual, so you can't cut it before it sets seed, otherwise you lose it. But however, Tim, it should set seed June. By August and September, it sets seed and dropped and everything. So I would keep an eye on yellow rattle, but usually by June, not June, this year everything's late, it's about 3 weeks late, so you have to keep an eye on the yellow rattle, wait till you see the seed drop and then cut. But that isn't usually August or September, that's sort of June, July. This year it's going to be more like the end of July by the look of it, because everything's late, but usually you wouldn't need to wait. But if for some reason you're in a really cold area and your yellow rattle hasn't set seed before you want to cut the other bits, then I would just cut around it. Yeah. The most risky thing with yellow rattle is people doing that first mow of the year in maybe late March, April, and cutting it before it's even got going. So you do have to be careful that you don't do an earlier cut that cuts into the yellow rattle. So that's why with yellow rattle, we often say, do it in a small patch, know where it is and keep an eye on it. Don't just spread it everywhere and hope for the best. Think like, this is my wildflower area for this year. I'm going to put the yellow rattle in, I'm going to keep an eye on it and make sure they don't mow it too early, like March, or they don't mow it too early, like sort of May, June. Just keep an eye on that yellow rattle, because otherwise it's very expensive and you can lose it in one season.
So the next question is from Sue. It says, how short does the grass need to be for self-heal and bird's foot trefoil? I'm assuming those are names of very lovely plants.
Yes, they're very nice too. How short does the grass have to be? Well, they'll thrive in, are you saying, I would say, if it starts getting sort of above a foot, then that's going to kind of probably overwhelm things like self-heal and bird's foot trefoil, but they might come up and then they might die down and while the other grass goes up. So it all depends on your site really, Sue, but they should definitely be in your site. They're probably plants that are in every single churchyard we can think of. So they'll be there. If you want to encourage them, make sure you don't scalp it too low is more important really, because then you kind of start losing it when people really scalp churchyards so that you can see brown soil, particularly then it goes really brown and crispy in the summer, then that's quite tricky. So it's more important not to scalp it too short rather than how long you leave it.
Can you plant yellow rattle in plugs?
Yes, Philip, you can. If you want to plant a seed yourself, you need to plant it with grass because it's a hemiparasite. So if you just planted a yellow rattle seed in a plug, like you would a courgette, then nothing will grow because it hasn't got the grass to grow with it. So you need to plant the yellow rattle and the seed. And we have actually brought yellow rattle plugs for one site, which was quite tricky because they'd had a fire there, so loads of nutrients had been leaking down the hill from lots of ash and fire. I mean, and it was an amazing site, but over 5 years it had really deteriorated. So we did buy yellow rattle plugs from Habitat Aid and they worked really well. Yeah, so you can do that.
The next question says, we find that many of our perennials like knapweed are still flowering in September. So we have not been cutting until then. Is this too late?
It is really. I mean, it is what I do, what we do, what the volunteers do. You don't want to leave the whole site to September to cut. Otherwise, other things like knapweed is a brute. It's going to come up whatever you do to it, like oxeye daisies, to be honest. But what you'll be doing is the knapweed will be surviving until September, which is great, but at the expense of vetches and finer flowers that really need more low nutrients because they're finer. So what you could do, and what we do, is we just scythe around the knapweed and let the knapweed carry on, and we cut everything else. And then that's really great for the bees, so they still get that.
And then Sarah's question, our churchyard has been scalped for years, but when it is left for a few weeks, it grows up as really rich grass. What are the steps again to start letting flowers come back? What about perennial plugs or wildflower turf?
It goes as really rich grass. Okay, so scalped for years, but when it's left for a few weeks, it grows up as really rich grass. That's interesting. It's been scalped for years, but maybe they've been leaving the clippings on, or maybe it's been having leachate from a compost area or a nearby farmer's field, or there must be some reason why that's quite rich, Sarah. So first of all, why is it so rich that even though it's been scalped, it's growing vigorously? Just maybe have a think about that. Second of all, get those clippings off every year. After a couple of years, you'll notice a difference. What are the steps again for start letting flowers come back? You can use perennial plugs. I wouldn't use wildflower turf unless it's in your burial ground. So for example, what you can do is, I think I might have mentioned it in the webinar, but you can cut a piece of turf from your flower rich area and swap it with a piece of turf from your non-flower rich area. And that's a really easy way to do that. You can do that in the autumn or in the spring. That's probably the best time to do it. Keep it watered if you do it in the spring, and that might be the best way to do it. So you're keeping your own kind of flora. Yeah.
Right, we've got time just for a couple of more questions and then we'll wrap up. Dave says, we have some areas that are species rich and some neglected areas which I'm trying to restore. Two questions. What is the optimum time for cutting green? Oh, you answered this one already, didn't you?
Oh yeah, that was the one I
Cutting
mentioned
green
that
hay.
Dave did, yeah.
Okay.
So I answered the top one. Optimum time is whenever they're setting seed, but before it's dropped. So you'll have to keep an eye on that one, Dave. And
any tips for composting the
it's a pain, isn't it? Because that's the problem, is it all comes at once and it's loads of it and it's really long. So no, I haven't got many tips about that, apart from the usual compost rules, is if you can have a mixture of things. If it's too wet, add a bit of cardboard. If it's too dry, add a bit of water, and try and get that process going. So I would just try and, if you can, it's a bit tricky in a churchyard compared to your home, but mix up the variety of what's in there, and you do need to turn it, and that will really help as well. But it is a tricky one, that one, yeah.
And then the final question is about people rather than plants. Same people for years, take great pride in their work. No likely alternative workers or volunteers if they stop doing it. I think that's kind of a plea for how do you reach out? How do you find people who are going to be passionate about this and take the time and help you on the kind of journey that you've described?
Yeah, I think what Sarah said though is it's contractors, isn't it? Same contractors, same people for years. Okay, so it's just, I think it's explaining why. I think sometimes when we're on board of it, we forget that the journey first of all needs to be why. Why are you wanting? We go straight in there with, you need to leave it long because of the flowers. But if we just take a few steps back, why do we want this? Because we've lost the habitat, because this is the only bit remaining, and try and sell them the why. And you just need to, what we do is we meet people on site and we walk around and we say how special it is. We say what we would like it to be. We say that it's part of a national movement, and just explain why it's important rather than it is important and we want you to do this. What I say sometimes, Sarah, is that I see churchyards as a time capsule. For me, they're a time capsule of the wildflowers and the habitat that would have been there generations ago, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. They're so special, we're losing them. We're losing them to undermanagement and overmanagement. They're really special, they're a time capsule, and if we manage them right, they will then be able to be the Noah's Ark to increase that seed bank for other areas of your area. So try and get them from all different angles. I mean, that might be a bit too much for a contractor, I don't know, but to maybe the congregation who might be a little bit resistant or whatever, say how special it is, say it's rare, it's special, you are the Noah's Ark for this habitat, probably in your whole parish, probably in your whole town. It is so important, and therefore you want to preserve it and hopefully spread it out to a wider area. And that sometimes is a nice kind of vision for people to come on board with what you're doing.
What a lovely note to end on. Our churchyards and burial grounds are a Noah's Ark for this precious habitat. That's a lovely place to stop. If you've still got a question we haven't got to, I am sorry, we've gone through a lot of them, but it's such an interesting topic. When we finish now, I'll send you all the slides, I'll send you all those links from the chat, there've been so many, and a link through to our feedback form. I do hope that you'll make it along to one of our other webinars this week. Thank you so much for Andrea. Yesterday and today, you just bring such practical wisdom and you make it very clear and very engaging. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. And can I just thank everybody here who are now custodians of these amazing places, and just by you being here just shows your interest, and it's just fabulous what you're doing. So thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you very much for coming, and I'll bring us to a close.
Bye.